Hello, and welcome to the Scouse Science Podcast. My name is Professor Tom Solomon. I'm here at the University of Liverpool. I'm Professor of Neurology and Director of the UK's Emerging Infections Research Unit. Today is a very special Scouse Science Podcast, and I have a guest in the studio.
In real life.
This is Jan Ravens, the actress and impersonator. Jan, thank you so much for being here today.
It's my pleasure.
It's a special day as well because it is World Encephalitis Day, and that's why we thought today we would have a special Scouse Science podcast all about encephalitis. We also will be joined later by Eva Maria Hodel, who is today pretending to be Holly Ellis, our real Scouse scientist who couldn't be with us today. And as the old timers will know, she will be feeding in questions and comments along the way. But first, a bit of housekeeping. So we have people on Zoom, we have people following on Facebook. We always like you to type into the chat now so we know it's working. So please say hello, tell us your name, tell us where you're watching from and whether you are a first timer or an old hander. Can you see they're all coming up here?
Yeah.
Please, so it says, please slow down, Tom. Good. I will slow down. Relax.
Breathe.
Relax.
And breathe.
I've had Jan has been giving me such a hard time here today. She really has. I have to sort out all these technical things, and she's been.
Yeah, I'm not envious of that. I have to do some of that at home in my home studio, and I'm, so I'm very relaxed today. So sorry if I'm making you feel intimidated.
All she's had to do is worry about her lippy and yeah,
powder.
You'll notice my forehead is very shiny, whereas Jan is just looking radiant. But anyway, so we've got some housekeeping. We also, thanks for typing in, people. I can see Hazel from the Wirral, a first timer. We also like you to answer a question in the chat. So the question today is, Jan actually has got today's question, which is?
The question is, when is a party not a party?
So there you go.
It's just to get you warmed up, everybody.
That will certainly get you warmed up. The question I was going to ask you was, invasion of Ukraine, good or bad? But
a bit dark. I think it's a bit dark.
Bit dark.
It's a bit too sort of scary, isn't it?
Okay. Here we are. So who else have we got? Mary from Dublin, first timer. Sheila's an old hand. This is fabulous. We'll wait until we've got our first comment on party, not a party, and then we'll move on. When you're obliged to go, yeah, we've all had parties like that, haven't we?
Yeah.
And Jan, have you been to any good parties recently?
No.
Been to any bad ones recently?
Well, no, I haven't been to any parties recently. In fact, I'm very much looking forward to actually organising a birthday party this year.
Right. Who's that for?
Me.
Right. Okay. Good. Fair enough. And is it a special one?
No. I think it is special. It's 64 because I kind of think when I'm 64, if you're a Scouser, is quite propitious.
Definitely.
Yeah.
That's Did you say 64?
Yeah.
She does not for 64, does she? Very good for 64.
Yes. Well, I've contrived the lighting.
yeah. I mean, that was the only thing she did fuss about. The lighting had to be absolutely perfect. So she's brought her own lighting with her. That's just the right shade.
Ring light. I should have brought my ring light actually.
Now, Jan, later on we'll explain why you're here on this special World Encephalitis Day. But I just thought we'd start with your upbringing. You are a Scouser.
I'm a plastic Scouser. I was brought up in Hoylake on the Wirral. My parents were both from sort of like Allerton. My dad went to Quarry Bank like John Lennon, and they first met actually. I think they didn't realise they met, but they first met at Dovedale Road Primary School. But both their sets of parents moved across to the Wirral when they were kids. It was really lovely being back in Liverpool today because I hadn't been back for years, and like the city centre is so unrecognisable. But I went, past the Empire where I'd been to lots of concerts as a teenager, and went into the Walker Art Gallery. There's a very good Sickert exhibition if anybody's local. So when
were you last here? When were you last back in Liverpool?
I can't even remember. It was probably about 10 years ago. But my mum died in 2014. But she was on the Wirral, so I'd drive up the M6
see her,
but not necessarily come over here.
Yeah. Well, I haven't said, because we're live and we haven't done it like this before. So I haven't done what I normally do and what you're meant to do, which is just make sure the audience know all about the guests. So I said, Jan, you are an actress and impressionist, but of course people will know you, especially from things like Dead Ringers, and you've been on lots of panel shows on Radio 4. Give us a the highlights of the key things you've done in recent years.
Well, I've my main kind of thing is this show on Radio 4, Dead Ringers, and I do lots of impressions, and I've been doing. Before lockdown, I was doing quite a lot of live work. I did a one-woman show called Difficult Woman when Theresa May was in her heyday, and so I sort of latched on to Theresa May and her very tense way of talking and her very sort of held demeanour, and latched on to that. And Theresa May was like sort of so tense that she wanted to smile, but the rest of her face wouldn't let her. So there were lots of sort of women. It was 2017 as sort of time of
who else was, because there were quite a lot of strong
there was Nicola Sturgeon, and there was Hillary Clinton pointing and waving, Hillary Clinton arriving at all those conventions, and Angela Merkel. It was sort of seemed like there was a tide in the affairs of women at that time, and now I'm trying to come up with some ideas for a new one-woman show. And of course, at the moment, I've been very keen on doing my Liz Truss.
Absolutely.
Because Liz Truss is sort of one of those people, I think, whose daddy always told her she was funny. And so she's like just always got this soft grin. But actually, she's now had to be more serious and wear a big Russian hat because she has lots of serious work to do. So she's a really good character.
She's a contender for the throne, isn't she? When Boris finally topples.
Yes. I mean, it's we're stuck between a rock and a hard place, really, aren't we? Because he sacked all the people of any. I was watching a program last night about dictators, talking about Stalin and Hitler, and it was saying how what dictators do is sack anybody with any ability who's close to them, and you sort of think, that seems to be what Boris Johnson's done, because he's just got all these people around him who are so vapid. Anyway, I hear you're having one of them on in a minute. So
we do have we are going to have it as one of our future guests, possibly. I'm not allowed to reveal yet.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so thank you for not saying.
Okay.
But Boris will be looking for things to do sometime in the next few weeks, so we'll be happy to have him. No, it's not him. But anyway, you're right. We're hoping to have a bit of a coup. But we've had Andy Burnham on before. We've had
lovely.
Yeah, we had also Edwina Curry a few weeks back. I don't know. She and your.
I used to do her on Spitting Image. She's quite sort of she's quite flirty, isn't she, Edwina? She's got a little twinkle, but because she's Liverpudlian, isn't she?
She is from here originally, and she was quite good, I must say. Yeah. I mean, we always get feedback, and people liked her, and she was very knowledgeable. We were talking about climate change.
Oh, really?
And she really knew her stuff, and she had her wind turbine up in the garden. They were doing this thing where they extract heat from the ground.
Oh, right.
She was bobbing around in a Tesla car. So she was impressive, especially given, I think she's nearly 80.
Is she?
Yeah, she's quite old now.
Yes, of course.
I may have got that wrong. Apologies if I have. But so she was brought up in Liverpool. You were brought up in Liverpool. The pair of you comedians in some senses. You more actively than her.
Yeah.
Did and then how did you get from being at school to being an actress and impersonator?
I suppose I was at West Kirby Grammar School, and there was a really brilliant drama teacher. Actually, she was an art teacher, but she did the school productions because there wasn't drama in their curriculum in those days. And I really wanted to go to drama school because I really wanted to be Glenda Jackson, because Glenda Jackson was also brought up in Hoylake, and she was like my heroine at the time because she was like in the RSC and a film star. So I really wanted to be Glenda Jackson. But I couldn't go to drama school because at that point you could get a grant to go to university or college, but you couldn't get one to go to drama school. So I went in, and my art drama teacher had been to Homerton in Cambridge, and she said, you must go to Homerton, marvelous punting on the backs, and all that. And that's
a college, isn't it?
Homerton's a teacher training college in Cambridge. So I trained as a teacher trained as a drama teacher in Cambridge. It was something to fall back on. But I knew, because my dad had loved comedy, and he and I used to watch Monty Python and Peter Cook and Dudley Moore and Spike Milligan, and we were very into all that sort of comedy, and I knew that Cambridge had a huge tradition of that, so I knew about the footlights and stuff. And so I sort of got into Cambridge through the back door, like through into teacher training college. And once I got there, I started being in all the university productions and in the footlights, and then, you know, and then it just sort of carried on from there, because I ended up directing the Footlights Review, and I ended up.
Were you the first female president? Is that right?
I was the first female president. Yeah, I mean, it was 1980, I think. So it was kind of that time. And me and Emma Thompson and Sandy Toksvig did the first all-female review in Cambridge called Woman's Hour. And
are you still in touch with those guys?
Off and on, not kind of like not all the time, but yeah, I see. And I saw Emma the other week at a memorial for somebody, you know, in the way one does these days. And Sandy, I sometimes see kind of, you know, work dues when there were such things, parties, I don't know. It just went on from there. And then I actually started off as a comedy producer, because I directed the review with Stephen Fry and Hugh Laurie and Emma Thompson and Tony Slattery, and that did really well. So then they asked me to be a radio comedy producer.
That was for the BBC.
For the BBC. And then I was the first woman to do that as well.
Right.
So I was so it was so stressful being the first woman.
Was it as stressful as it's been for me today to put on all this technical?
Yes, only in a more sort of, you know, sustained way, in a sort of more chronic rather than acute way, if I might use a medical term. Yes, it was sort of went on for years, being kind of this pressure of being the first woman and thinking, you know, if I screw it up, they'll never get another one. Yeah. So anyway, then I stopped producing and started performing. And
what have you preferred, the producing or the performing?
I prefer performing. I mean, I enjoyed producing and I enjoyed directing. I've directed a bit in the theatre and stuff as well, and I do enjoy that. The thing about producing is there's a lot of admin, and I'm not really very good at admin.
Right.
And I don't like it. You know, it's like it's sort of that attention to detail that you have to have. I mean, I have to have attention to detail in my work. Obviously, it's kind of key. But I think, you know, there are some things you don't mind paying attention to, isn't it? It's like there's some details in sort of mathematical things or actually science things. I just have no capability or kind of aptitude for. Whereas, you know, detail in, you know, dissecting a character, you know, it's fascinating to me. So I'll sort of go there. You know?
Yeah. I think you're right. I was just thinking, you know, so the technical stuff, like we talked about today, you can see how many people I've had they're all on the screen behind the scenes helping with everything. So clearly that's not my forte. But you know, when it comes to the science and experiments or thinking about populations of patients, etc., I think you know when you really have to be, you know, 100% on your game, and you have to really put maximum effort in. I mean, I think I didn't sort of thrive on the responsibility of being a producer. The sort of, and also when I did it, I was like 23. So I think being the person with whom the buck stopped felt like a bit of a huge thing at that point. And it had been a very well trodden path for guys from Cambridge who'd been in footlights, but as I say, for me it wasn't. And also the BBC, I mean, this was like 1981 or 2. I mean, the BBC was like a golf club, you know, there were full of sort of, you know, chaps who, you know, served in the war and, you know, marvellous, you know, it was a G&T jock. Oh yes, don't mind if I do. It was very sort of like that. You know, when you did they let you in? Did they sort of accept you into that club, or?
Well, because a lot of the young guys I knew, but the guy who was head of Light Entertainment at the time, as it was called, Light Entertainment, was called Bobby J, who sounds like a sort of end of the pier comic Bobby J had a sort of moustache like that, you know. And apparently he gathered all the male producers together before just before I was due to start, and said, "Now we might have to sort of, you know, be a bit careful with Jan, because certain times of the month, you know, might be a bit iffy, you know." And they were all kind of, what? Because I mean, they
thankfully things have changed.
Yes,
I guess.
Yes, to some degree, yes, they have.
So And you've come all this way today, World Encephalitis Day.
Yeah.
Because we want to talk about encephalitis. And it was your husband, wasn't it, who became unwell with encephalitis?
Yeah.
So
yeah. He became unwell in January 2015. He was a CEO of a record company, and he became unwell actually in India, which I think was just chance. So he phoned from India and said, "Oh, I feel terrible. I've got a real fever." Anyway, he was coming home the following day. So he came home and was really, really feverish, not making sense. I mean, oh dear, put him to bed. And we all thought it was quite funny. So
he really wasn't making sense. What was he saying?
Well, yeah. I mean, when he first got home, he was, and I was away on a sort of having a weekend away because my mum had just died the month before, and then we'd had Christmas and everything, and so I was sort of, when Max was due to get back from his trip, I was going to go away, and somebody was taking over looking after Louis, and so I wasn't there when he got back, but everyone said, "Oh, he's and this is like so it was probably like about 2 or 3 days, I suppose, because he went to the doctor straight when he got back, but I suppose it was 2 or 3 days before I saw him from when his symptoms started. And so when I got back, and he's a really sort of pragmatic, reasonable, capable person, so to have him like I don't know what away with the fairies kind of thing, just not making any sense at all, was really sort of like scary. And also one's instinct is to say, God, he's gonna how we're going to laugh about this when he recovers.
What did you think it was at that stage?
Well, I think we thought that maybe it was some sort of I think he'd been to his doctor, and he had a private doctor at the time because he was an executive, and the doctor had sent him, he'd had lots of tests for sort of tropical diseases because he'd been in India, and nobody was quite sure. And so then after about 3 days, we took him to a specialist who was a neurologist, Angus Kennedy, and I think he kind of knew straight away, and he did the tests, did a lumbar puncture, and did and I think he then thought this is encephalitis, but he was testing to see whether it was a herpes encephalitis, which it was. And he kind of continued to be more feverish. He was taken straight into hospital, and sorry, my tummy is rumbling.
I don't think
picking up. It's right next to the microphone. Anyway,
they'll let us know.
And then he kind of went into a coma, and so he was in a private hospital at this point. And interestingly, then his brain was swelling so much, and so then obviously it was all getting really, really scary, and the specialist had the whole family, all 5 sons, and me around saying, this isn't good, and this is going to be a long road, and this is this was all just sort of such shocking information.
Out of the blue, isn't it? Yeah.
And Max's middle son, Mark, he was kind of going, yeah, but it's going to be fine. I mean, because he had very kind of, positive. And everyone was going, Mark, it might not be, it might not be fine. But he was just trying to say, yeah, but it's actually, but it's Dad, it's going to be fine. And Angus was at pains to point out that, well, it might not be fine, and we were sort of saying, what's the survival chances and all that. I mean, it was surreal, actually. It was surreal and scary and awful. And then, but anyway, he was moved to Charing Cross Hospital in London, because that's a national health hospital and it specialises in.
Yeah, you don't want to be in a private hospital with something like encephalitis.
No. So we went to Charing Cross, and in the end he didn't have to. He was going to have well, you probably knew better, that he was going to have his skull opened up.
Craniectomy to take the pressure off.
Yeah.
To allow so the brain's very swollen.
So can anybody recover from it? I mean,
we do that. You do basically do that. So the pressure's so high, you just basically take because you're in the cranium, the skull is a tight box.
Yes.
And if the brain is swelling in there, then you can actually release pressure by taking a bit of the skull off.
Right.
And then put it back. Later,
Anyway, he in the end didn't have to have that done, but then he was in a coma. I don't know if they put him in the coma or if he just was in a coma. And then gradually over days or weeks, can't remember, came out of that and gradually showed more signs of recognition. And maybe used the odd word that a sort of a word particular to him, but it was it felt, I mean, I think over a couple of months he regained sort of, he gradually came out of the coma and started talking again and a little bit. And we tried sort of music therapy because we thought that that was what he'd been into, and thought that might bring some stuff up. But it was tough. It was and it felt like a long time, and then eventually he did they sort of got him out of bed and sat him in a thing, like a sort of chair with supporting things, and I remember going in and seeing him in this chair kind of like this, and everyone was going, look, isn't this brilliant
to you?
It's like, oh my god, and it sort of almost brought home, I mean, lying on the bed, it was bad enough with all the tubes and everything, but I mean, just sitting there like that, I just sort of thought, oh my god, that's not Max. That's not Max.
Were you worried he was going to be like that then for forever?
Yeah. But he did learn to walk, and he had a huge amount of, he over months he learned to walk and talk again.
Let's pause there. We'll hear more about how Max got on, but we all, as people know, we usually have a pause and just find out what's been happening out on the chat. So Eva Maria, maybe it's a terrible time to pause, I don't know.
No, let's cheer
Eva Maria is going to join us and tell us what's been happening out in the chat. And people, please post questions for Jan or for me, or comments, and Eva Maria will feed them in. Maybe to begin with, when is a party not a party? Eva Maria.
Yes, so we had a few answers, but I think then people were just too intrigued just with Jan's story. So so one answer was if I don't dance, or the one organising it, if it's in 10 Downing Street. Those are some of the selections. Yes. We also had I think quite a few people from the Encephalitis Society today. So they're all, I think, listening in. John, Laura, Caroline, Julia, Pam, Pauline, Philippa and Sarah. But we also have a few people listening in on Zoom who have a very personal story with encephalitis. So there's Simon, who has a brother-in-law who had encephalitis. There's also Fiona, Paul, Caroline, Yvonne. Caroline herself mentioned that lumbar punctures brings her out in a cold sweat. So yes, I think people can relate with your story, Jan, your husband's story. Yep. No questions so far. I think people just want to hear more.
Yeah. Richard wants to buy the wonderful red World Encephalitis t-shirts, which we have one. I was wearing one earlier, but we decided it didn't quite look right. But here's Jan sporting this year's model of the World Encephalitis.
Yeah, it's got a beautiful back as well. If I could show that off.
Yeah,
go on.
Ava, of course, is wearing hers. Yeah.
Oh, red
Encephalitis code
very
red
good.
emergency.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was talking to the taxi driver on the way here, and she said, you know, she'd never heard of encephalitis, and I think a lot of people haven't. So the more we can make people aware of it, and you know, be on the lookout for it, kind of thing, because it's isn't it true that the quicker you treat it, the better?
Absolutely. I mean, had you heard of it before
No,
your husband
never
was ill? No. And had anyone in the family?
No. And so we had no idea what it was, and I think and that's obviously one of my kind of not constant, but you know, I have it with me all the time, that, like, you know, had we got Max, you know, into hospital earlier, you know, and had the drugs the antiviral drugs, the cyclovir and stuff, would the outcome have been better? And you know, that's sort of
difficult
with
to know. I mean, I think
you
can't beat yourself up over these things, can you?
Well, you can actually.
Well, you must try not to.
Yes.
I mean, you know, this is, like you say, this is something most people haven't heard of. Now, we think now about, well, we've done some studies, about 23 people in 100 have heard of encephalitis now.
Oh, right.
It used to be about 1 in 100 or less. So, you know, through the work of the Encephalitis Society with World Encephalitis Day, people are hearing about it more, and more people are coming to hospital earlier. We think, I don't know how they work this out, but we started World Encephalitis Day in 2014, and we think now 236 million people have been reached through all the sort of engagement work since then. But it's still not enough, is it? 2 in 10 is not enough in terms of numbers.
No, it's not, because I mean, it's like sepsis, you know, it's one of those things that, you know, if you catch on early, you know, you can, you know, the outcome is going to be so much better. And also, I think there is that sort of very British thing of feeling like, you know, you've got to have a stiff upper lip, you've not to bother anybody, you've not to put your head above the parapet, you've not to say, excuse me, I think something's really not right here. And that's kind of the thing that, you know, or laugh it off, you know, as I was trying to do. And you know, it's really important to kind of to if somebody is, you know, feverish or you know, and to take it seriously.
Especially if I was on the radio this morning. I mean, some of the things that, as part of encephalitis, severe headache, you know, that could be lots of things. Fever can be lots of things. But I think the critical thing is when somebody's behavior is strange, if they're not getting the words out properly, or they're muddled or confused, that's the point where it could be encephalitis, it could be something else. But the brain, you know, if your brain's not working properly, then that's a sign that you know, you need to be seen. And we don't, by that, you know, we don't mean going upstairs and forgetting what you went upstairs or coming down and realizing you've forgotten your jumper. You know, we mean not recognizing people, or not knowing where you are, or not knowing what time of day it is.
That was all, you know, that was all going on. That was all going on. But I mean, for me, it's sort of you know, that the interesting thing, I mean, it is like the outcome as well. You know, it's how outcomes are different for so many people. Like some people, you know, just sort of get headaches. I mean, Max is a very, you know, he's you know, he learned to walk and talk again.
How long did it take to you know, till he left hospital, for example?
I think he left hospital after about sort of 8-10 weeks. But actually, I think he probably should have stayed longer. I think we were just desperate to get him home. And
because one of the challenges we find is that people do want to get home, and also they look physically, once you can walk and talk, people think, oh, you're fine, you know, you've made a good recovery. And actually a lot of the problems that, you know, become more apparent once people are at home, or once they're starting to rehabilitate.
I mean, psychologically, it was really hard, because he would get really frustrated and angry, and which is completely out of character. And also he would want to leave the house. He would like pack his bag to go on a business trip, and so I've got to go to Tokyo, you know, I've got to go to Tokyo. And so he'd be at the front door, and we'd have to say, oh, the front door isn't working, unfortunately. He'd say, what the fuck's going on? And it was like, it was really, really stressful. I mean, we had carers in the house. So
he just thought he had a meeting in Tokyo that he didn't have. Yeah. We had, I mean, it's Max, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I've had patients like him, one in particular that I always remember, one of the earliest ones I saw with problems like this, who basically he'd lost about, I don't know, 30, 40 years of memory. He still thought it was the 1980s. And so he thought he was still in the army. He didn't think he was married. He kept saying, in clinic, he would say, who's this woman? Yeah. And, we would say it's your wife. And, but we...
well, that's what happened to me, sort of. I mean, I think Max seemed to kind of have a connection with me when I... when he first kind of came round. Right. And I remember when I was in his room at hospital, and I turned around to go and get him something from the bathroom, and he said, "Oh, Jan," and I was like, "Oh my God," he said my name, and it was so kind of amazing that he said my name. But then, and then he sort of did seem to sort of know that I was his wife. And he did feel some kind of, acted as if he felt some kind of connection with me. And then, he would often say, "Oh, what would I do? Thank you so much," and da 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 da. Because there was sort of like carers there. Carers would say, "It's time for a shower. It's time for a bath," and I'd sort of say, "No, or I'd get in the bath with him or something, or I'd give him a shower," because I wanted him to sort of kind of retain some kind of intimacy and not just be a person that people sort of did things to. And he appreciated that, but then there were these like moments of frustration and kind of a sort of hallucination, really. And it was after about a couple of years actually that he gradually sort of withdrew into himself in a sort of depression. He would spend all his time in one room in the house, not particularly want to join in for meals or anything, but he would if pushed, kind of thing. And in the end, he admitted that he didn't know me. He didn't know. He said, I don't know. I was like crying about, so we were out with friends, and I was crying about something, and somebody said, "Oh, Max, give Jan a hug," and he was just sort of sitting there, and he didn't hug me, and he wouldn't hug me. And when we got home, I said, "What the hell was that about?" And he said, "Look, I don't know you. I don't know you. I don't love you. And this is like after 2 years of like, him going through this illness and going through rehab and learning to walk and talk and relearning language completely. I mean, he had to learn what an elephant was, what a bicycle was, what a banana was. I mean, it was like every word, he was getting words all mixed up to start with, to learn all that again and to sort of have gone through all that. And I said, "But what about, everything you said? What about?" And he said, "Oh, I was making it up." But I think he has this sort of way, and he still sort of has this slight way of talking that's slightly sort of childlike. I mean, he's much, he lives on his own now, and we got divorced because is what you're going to say to that. But he has his various sort of tropes of things that he talks about over and over again. Right. But he can go. He goes to the shops. He goes to a restaurant. You wouldn't necessarily know that anything was wrong. Outside, it looks normal. But if you know him, you think, "Oh, here we go. Here we go with this conversation again."
And what when he said, "I don't know you, I don't love you," how do you feel when that happens?
Well, devastated, just devastated, and also. I was like mystified because he had kind of been very sort of, I guess, politely saying, "Thank you so much. What would I do without you?" And writing sort of, loving notes and stuff. And I the idea that was how he really felt, because we'd been really close. We'd been a really close couple, and very, very happy. It was like, it was like that Meatloaf song, well, I can do anything, but I can't do that. Because when something like that happens to your husband, as I'm sure some people listening will know, or a loved one, you think, oh, okay, well, my life has also now completely changed. Yeah. And what am I, how am I going to deal with this? And it's like, well, you love the person. And so obviously you're going to do everything you can to help them. And I was never, ever going to leave, I was never going to give up on him. Mm-hmm. And, God knows what might have happened in the future, but that was not my plan. Mm. I just realized that this was that in a lot of ways we'd had a kind of golden life together, and this thing had now happened, and we had to deal with it, and I had to deal with it, and I was kind of willing to do that, but I can't I can't be I can't do that. I can't live with somebody that doesn't want me there. No. And has no connection with me. And so I said, well, I tell you what, not in that moment, but yeah. I suggested to him that I moved out for a while and give him some space, and so obviously because he'll miss me. Yeah. Did he? No. No, he didn't.
Who's that woman?
Yeah. So yeah, it was. So in the end, I moved out, and now we're divorced. Yeah.
It's a terrible thing. We talk about encephalitis as being a thief that robs people, and
definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, totally. And it robbed. It robbed the boys. We've got 2 sons each and 1 together, and it robbed all of them of this amazing. He was a rock to me, but he was a rock to all of us. He was incredibly wise, and Alfie, my son, who his stepson, said, he learned loads of what he knows about relationships and about dealing with life, from Max. And Max was always the guy that would say, if I had a problem, he'd sort of say, Doll, what's the worst that happens? Yeah. What's the worst that happens? And he would always bring you round and make everything okay. And he was the kind of guy where you just thought, this is safe harbor. Everything's going to be okay. Yeah. because Max is there, and the kids felt that too, and and my mum felt it, and our friends felt it. He was a rock, and actually that's something I wanted to ask you, which is a sort of maybe a really silly question. He was working so hard. Through choice, he loved his work with Universal Music, but he did, he traveled a lot, he worked a lot. Is there any sort of sense that kind of a high stress life sort of over a long period of time would
we thought so? We have, as we do lots of research on encephalitis here in Liverpool, especially herpes encephalitis, and you do sometimes hear this, that it seems to be after a stressful event that somebody then seems to develop encephalitis. But I think it's just because you look for causes, you look for why now. This virus, herpes simplex virus, as you know, causes cold sores, and it's very common. And in most people, it causes cold sore, they don't know they've got it at all. And then in some people, instead of the virus actually hides away at the back of the throat and then comes down, causes cold sores. That's how it gets passed on. But in some people, it seems to go the wrong way and up into the brain. And it's right. Encephalitis is like a nasty cold sore on the brain.
Because herpes is such a kind of bastard.
Yes.
It really is.
Yeah.
Because it's not only cold sores, which are obviously a pain in the arse, and I used to get them loads as a kid, and now I don't get them on my mouth, I get them up my nose, which is weird.
Horrid, yeah.
But also, doesn't it cause like chicken pox and shingles?
There are different herpes viruses.
Oh right.
So herpes simplex virus is the one that causes cold sores and encephalitis. That's herpes simplex virus type 1. There's a closely related one called herpes simplex virus type 2 that causes genital ulcers, and it tends to cause meningitis. So inflammation of the brain membranes rather than encephalitis deep in the brain. And then the chickenpox virus, varicella zoster virus, is another type of herpes virus, and that causes.
Okay, and is that the same as shingles?
Chickenpox and shingles. Yeah, it's the same one virus that causes chickenpox in kids and shingles in adults.
Right. And is there any kind of sign that there's going to be a vaccine for herpes?
There is, interestingly, there is a vaccine for the chickenpox virus, which is used in the United States. So they vaccinate people. In the UK, we don't yet vaccinate people routinely. But one of the things the Encephalitis Society is looking at is whether we should be, and doing the work, the cost-benefit analysis. We think probably we should be. There's no vaccine yet against herpes simplex virus that's available. But
there's work being done.
Yeah. It'll come. Now we must pause again.
Yes.
So we're going to show our video for World Encephalitis Day, and then we'll see what other chat there is from Eva Maria. But first of all, by the magic of the internet, I don't even have to do anything. Look, here are my hands, and it will appear. There we go.
Today, a range of landmarks around the world are being lit in red, and there's a particular reason for that being the case.
Today is the 4th annual World Encephalitis Day.
Today we've been over in Liverpool attempting to break the Guinness World Record for the biggest human organ.
We booked an old route master to take people on a journey to make a bit of noise around the condition.
I think for change to happen, we really need governments and, of course, the World Health Organization. And I think if everybody pulls together and prioritises encephalitis, then we will achieve some real change here.
Encephalitis matters.
Nearly 70% of people in the UK have never heard of encephalitis.
Encephalitis is inflammation and swelling of the brain, often caused by a virus or by the body's defences. Today we've had a great day here with the Encephalitis Conference. It's grown year on year.
It's actually been absolutely remarkable to see the growth in this conference.
I think it's sort of highly significant that this conference is happening today on the day that the first patient worldwide is being vaccinated against COVID-19.
I'm glad that we're able to do this on Dr. Radio today because we need to raise awareness.
The work that you do is just so essential to families, and I don't know what people would do without you guys.
Great. That was Rebecca Adlington at the end.
Oh, right.
Swimmer, whose sister had encephalitis as well.
What was her outcome?
Okay, I think. I mean, she was young, so you never, when it's a young person, you never quite know where they would have got to anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think not, in that sense, not as kind of impactful as it was for Max, because.
So is it worse? Is the impact generally worse if you get it when you're older?
People, elderly do badly, and Max wasn't, in the elderly category. But also, it can be devastating in young children as well. And it just there are different causes, so it depends. It depends a bit on the cause. We've talked about herpes viruses, but the other big group is autoimmune encephalitis,
right? Where
we don't pinpoint any virus or bacteria causing it, but where it's the body's defences just attacking the brain.
The defences attacking the brain.
So your host defences, the things that protect you from infections,
right?
The antibodies and the T cells, those attack the brain for no known reason.
So what's the difference between encephalitis and meningitis then?
Yeah, so in meningitis, so inflammation is, if you scratch your arm, it goes red and angry. That's inflammation. So meningitis is inflammation of the brain membranes.
Right.
So here, look.
Okay.
I don't know if you might use it. The membranes covering the brain.
Right.
Whereas in encephalitis, the pathogen, the virus, is deep inside the brain itself.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So that's why overall outcomes are worse for encephalitis than for meningitis.
Yeah. Because, and it's so interesting as well, the brain. As I'm sure I don't need to tell you, Tom.
Please do.
But the thing that I always think of that sort of Grace and Perry kind of cartoon or of like, what different areas of the brain are thinking about, and it's like, kind of, new carpet, sex, or whatever, or kind of, all these different areas, friends, hope. And Max lost 30 years of memory. He doesn't remember anything of the last 30 years. And I think, and also he's lost what Angus called the center for empathic responsibility.
Right. Yeah.
So he can't really kind of
empathize
or tune into other people in any sort of sensitive way really anymore.
But it does sound like he has insight. He knows he was ill and understands that's affected him.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So the guy, this patient of mine who lost his memory, didn't know he'd ever been ill and literally couldn't retain things. So he would say, like I said, who's this woman? And we'd say, it's your wife. And he'd say, I'm not married. I've got to get back to my unit. He thought he was in the army. And then we'd finally sort of managed to convince him. Okay. And then like a minute later, he'd say the same again. And we had to get a, he'd left the army obviously years ago, but we had to sort of get, with the army's help, fake up a certificate of medical discharge so that he could look at that. And if he had things to actually look at, then when he was getting anxious about this, you could point and say, look, read that, and he'd read it and say, oh, okay. But terrible condition.
That must be like an absolute nightmare for the wife as well.
Yeah.
To deal with that thing. It's like that sort of, I think that's a documentary about somebody with that sort of 10-second memory thing.
Yeah, really difficult.
Oh.
Now let's see. Eva Maria is going to join us again and tell us what's been happening out there in the chat sphere.
Yeah, we had a lot of discussions in the chat, especially on Zoom. There's a lot of comments about people mentioning the struggle with the lack of awareness and issues around delayed diagnosis and examples of misdiagnosis, for instance, of drug abuse in younger people, etc. Also, people are sharing the issue of the hidden disability and the impact the encephalitis had on their relationships. There is also a lot of discussion around the importance of the herpes simplex virus and the problem that many patients say that they never had a cold sore before they were diagnosed. And I think that's, of course, also an important issue. And then we had a lot of questions as well. So Brian wanted to know whether it's possible to retrospectively diagnose. His son might have had an infection when he was very little, which then impacted on his development.
So very difficult to diagnose retrospectively. A brain scan might show you brain damage, but it wouldn't tell you the cause of that damage, and it's almost impossible to know that. And I can see someone, I think Christine is saying, should she, when she gets a cold sore, should she put tons of acyclovir on? And the answer to that's no. So people, 70% of the population, 80% have been infected with the cold sore virus, and we have it in our system tucked away. So most people, it doesn't do any harm. When it does cause a cold sore, that doesn't mean it's then going to go and cause encephalitis. Encephalitis happens at about 2 per million people per year. So getting, just because you've got a cold sore, doesn't mean it's going to cause encephalitis. But of course, if a cold sore is troubling you, then dab some stuff on. But it's a sort of different, even though it's the same virus, different issue.
So acyclovir is effective.
It is the drug. It's effective for cold sores.
Because that was that drip that Max was on.
Yeah.
Helen wanted to know, she had herpes simplex encephalitis when she was pregnant, and her son is fine, but she was wondering whether there is a potential risk then for the baby.
Yeah, no genetic predisposition. So the fact, for example, that Max had it doesn't mean that any of his children will be any more likely to have it. So for the most part, no genetic predisposition, although there are some very rare genetic changes that can make very young kids susceptible to herpes virus infections. But in general, if you're an adult who has had herpes encephalitis, or a child who's had herpes encephalitis, there's no risk for anyone else in the family.
I've got one more anatomical question, so maybe you have to take your brain back out, Tom. Sarah wanted to know whether encephalitis is a general swelling of the complete brain or whether it can be localized to specific lobes.
Good question. So for herpes encephalitis, it's this lobe here, which, so if you put your hand there, just sort of in front of your ear, that's the temporal lobe, and that is especially affected in herpes encephalitis. Whereas in other forms of encephalitis, in Japanese encephalitis, sorry, I should have brought it a bit closer. So that's the temporal lobe there, if I'm looking that way. So it's there. If we turn it around and look inside here, this is the brain stem. And in Japanese encephalitis, which is a mosquito-borne cause, that particularly affects the brain stem. So different causes affect different parts of the brain, and therefore can lead to different problems afterwards. The temporal lobe is where your memory is kept, and that's why memory is so badly affected in herpes encephalitis.
And then we've got a question to Jan from Sarah. She wanted to know whether Max has any strategies that help him to manage his memory outcomes.
Yes, he writes a very detailed diary every day, and actually it slightly breaks my heart. This he cuts articles out of the paper and puts them in a scrapbook, so he can sort of keep up with that's how he kind of keeps up with what's going on, so he can sort of talk about stuff. I think what he does, I don't live with him any longer, so I don't know specifically, but I know that he keeps his life very simple. And he was always a man that was very, he kept in touch with friends. He was, unlike, I know a lot of men leave it to their partners to organise their social life, but Max was always very good at keeping up with old friends. And because his memory was lost for 30 years, actually a lot of his friends he's had for 40 years. So, it was actually quite good that he had these people that he still did remember, and he still sees. And, a lot of, because he was a very loyal friend, and I think a lot of that sort of came back, karmically. Lots of his friends are very loyal to him. So, but he does write everything down and keeps a very detailed diary, and sort of, I think, cross-references when he's seeing that person again. So he can say, he sort of says, so how are your sons, Tom and William, so he'll have notes prepared, kind of thing.
I see there's a question there from Karen. Actually, just to say also that we're talking quite fast, I know, and covering a lot of ground. And if people do want to go back and listen again, the live recording is on Facebook, and you can go back and watch that whenever. So Karen's made a comment on that, but also she's asked, why are lots of comedians ex-teachers? Jan, Romesh, Greg Davis, Billy Crystal, Dawn French. Is that any observations on that?
Well, I think I think there's no scarier audience than a class full of children. There's no tougher audience. And from the sort of, I was never actually a teacher, but I did do teaching practice. And I think, the kids are never going to be, sympathetic to if you're sort of feeling like you've had a bad day, in the same way as a comedy audience aren't. So I think it takes a lot of guts, and a lot of teachers are, you meet some people who are teachers and you think, God, how do you stand in front of a class full of children? But it's a certain sort of confidence you have to have, I think, and actually charisma as well.
You have to keep the audience, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Really, yeah.
So we met, I was thinking we've got to wrap up in a minute, but we met at the Edinburgh Festival, wasn't it, in 2017, I think. And what were you doing there then?
I was doing the show I spoke about before. I was doing Difficult Woman.
Right. But are you going to Edinburgh this year, taking a show to Edinburgh this year?
I'm not going to Edinburgh. Right. I'm not putting that pressure on. I'm just sort of...
But you have got a show coming up, or something you're working on?
Well, I've got something I'm working on, which is which is actually sort of partly to do with dating in your 60s.
Oh, yeah, tell us all about it.
Which is,
obviously a long way off.
Whenever you start, putting a show together, it seems like you always have to go through this process of having sort of several terrible titles, which are quite often pun related. Right. And my dreadful pun related title for this one is Love in an Old Climate. Right. Yes, it's a very, very, it's very funny and tragic. Sort of, the whole dating. Are you doing
a lot of dating at the moment?
I have been. I've got a boyfriend now.
Oh, that's nice.
I had a boyfriend. I had an on-off boyfriend for a few years after Max and I split up, and then I started doing the dating apps, which, as I'm sure some of you may know, are a mixed blessing. Right. I meet so many people who met through dating apps now. Lots of our friends, we met on Bumble, we met on Hinge, we met on eHarmony. Right. But it's very funny as a woman looking at all the photos on the that people put up as profile pictures, because like lots of men have got they've taken the photograph with their laptop here, so it's focusing very much on the double chin, right. So you sort of think, guys, or then there's some guys, who've got 2 pints.
Going like you're this. You're definitely going to want to date them, aren't you?
Some guys with a fish.
Okay.
Some guys on a motorbike.
Right.
But my worst type of photograph is guy lying in bed with bare shoulder. Bare shoulders and horrible sheets. He's taken his photograph like that.
In your photo, what do you hold? Your Oscar nominations.
Oh, my BAFTA.
Your BAFTA.
I think in one of them I'm holding my dog.
Right.
In one of them I'm holding a pavlova that I've just met. And in another one I think I'm with one of my sons. Because that's another thing that blokes do. They're standing next to this very much younger, very glamorous woman who's clearly their daughter.
Right. Yeah. Interesting. I've not been involved in these things for a long time.
No,
hopefully never will.
Yes,
but, you never know. The Solomon family household is day by day.
Yes,
you never know what's coming next. Anyway, Jan, it's been fabulous having you here. Let me do before we say our goodbyes, I better do my wrapping up stuff.
Yes.
I've got my sheet. As we've said earlier, this Scouse Science episode is available as an audio podcast, which you can download in all the usual places. And whilst you are there, please rate, review, and subscribe. And if you don't know what those things mean, ask somebody. But that helps us. And tell your mates about the podcast. And you'll know there's all sorts of fascinating chats that we've had in previous episodes, quite a bit about COVID, but also about other things, climate change, muscle bulk. We had people taking some muscle cells up to the space station. Okay. It's fascinating, yeah. Wow. And we've had some interesting guests. I mentioned Edwina Curry, and we talked about Andy Burnham, but we've had lots of other people. Graham Medley from Sage has been on before, Jane Garvey, Rory Bremner, all sorts. And our next event is Monday, the 21st of March. And we are having a podcast all about music and the science of music. We're joined by the local DJ, Youssef. All of our younger listeners will know Youssef. He is a sort of a raver. They do these rave parties. You'll know the sort of thing. Houses with thousands of people. And a guy called Edward Coutinho, who is not a footballer. He is from the music department here and does all sorts of stuff on the science of music. But we'll try and get a footballer one day.
Yeah.
That's my ambition.
No, actually, he sounds very interesting.
But meanwhile, we should end. So, Jan, thanks very much for joining us. Thanks for coming all the way.
My pleasure.
It's been really great to hear you sharing your family experience. I think it's helpful for people to hear a bit more about encephalitis.
Yeah, well, and also just to spread the, spread awareness of it. That's the kind of my main concern really, is to just make people aware of it, and so that people can be diagnosed quickly and get help.
Thanks very much. So we will go now, and when I click my fingers, the music will magically appear again, I think. But thanks everyone very much for joining us. Do you think this will work?
Go on.